I never imagined my quiet life in a small Arizona suburb would spiral into chaos when the HOA demanded keys to my private gate. Their illegal power grab ended up making me the neighborhood's most unlikely defender. How would you react if you discovered your property rights weren't just being ignored, but targeted as part of a larger scheme? The loud banging on my front door startled me so much that I spilled coffee all over my favorite t-shirt. Who the hell knocks like that at 7:30 on a Saturday morning? I yanked the door open, ready to give someone a piece of my mind, only to find Karen Whitaker standing there, clipboard in hand, with that plastic smile that never reached her eyes. "Good morning, neighbor," she chirped. Her tone was sweet as syrup, but her eyes were cold as steel. "As the new president of the Desert Trails Homeowners Association, I'm personally delivering important notices today." She shoved a thick envelope into my hands before I could say a word. The bold red HOA seal was stamped across the top. "What is this about?" I asked, still dabbing coffee from my shirt. Karen's smile widened unnaturally. "The board voted unanimously last night. You're required to provide keys to your gate within 7 days." My brain froze. My gate? You mean my private driveway gate? Why on earth would I give you keys to that? "Your corner lot happens to be the perfect shortcut between Willow Avenue and Cactus View Drive," she explained, gesturing toward my fenced-in backyard. "Right now, residents waste nearly 5 minutes driving around your property. But per Section 14.3 of the HOA bylaws, we have easement rights for community access." I could feel my blood pressure rising. I bought this corner lot because of the privacy. That gate and fence, installed 2 years ago specifically to stop people from cutting through my yard. "This is ridiculous. It's my private property," I said, trying to stay calm despite the fury in my chest. "I paid extra for this lot because I wanted privacy. That gate stays locked." Karen's smile disappeared like a switch had flipped. "I don't think you understand. This isn't a request. The board has already voted. You've got 7 days to comply, or we'll begin issuing daily fines of $100. She turned her clipboard toward me and pointed at a document filled with signatures. "Every board member agrees. This is happening whether you like it or not." I recognized the names. Jason Whitaker, Karen's husband, Linda Greer, who lived in that big ranch house on Cactus View Drive, and Eric Soto, the quiet guy who never said a word at meetings but always voted however Karen wanted. "I think I need to review my property documents." I forced myself to keep a steady voice. "I don't believe the HOA has the right to demand access to my private driveway." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Check all you want. Section 14.3 is very clear. 7 days or the fines begin." She turned and walked away, calling over her shoulder, "Oh, and by the way, your hedges are 3 inches too tall. You might want to trim those before our next inspection." I slammed the door and leaned against it, my hands trembling with frustration. Who did she think she was? I bought this house 4 years ago, before most of these people had even moved into the neighborhood. That afternoon, I was pulling weeds in my front yard when I heard the rumble of Jason Whitaker's oversized black pickup. Instead of taking the corner like a normal person, he slowed as he approached and deliberately turned onto my grass, cutting across the edge of my lawn, just to save himself maybe 10 seconds. When he saw me watching, he had the audacity to wave and smile before speeding off. I stood there, garden trowel in hand, stunned. Had they been planning this all along? Was this why Karen suddenly wanted keys to my gate? That night I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, haunted by Karen's smug face and Jason's tire tracks on my grass.
Around 2 a.m., I gave up and headed to my home office, pulling out the thick folder of paperwork from when I bought the house. I spent hours flipping through deeds, plat maps, and original community documents. As the first light of morning crept through the window, I finally found it, right there in the fine print of my deed. My heart pounded. I had purchased this property before the HOA even existed. There was a specific clause that clearly stated the driveway was private, with no easement rights whatsoever. The HOA had no authority to demand access to my private driveway. I was just about to go to bed when I heard the sound of a car outside. Rushing to the window, I caught sight of Linda Greer's red sedan slowly creeping along the edge of my yard, her tires carving fresh tracks right next to the ones Jason had left. This wasn't just Karen and Jason anymore. The entire HOA board was declaring war on my property, and I wasn't going down without a fight.
And in that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to fight this. I was going to win, no matter what it took. Standing there in my pajamas at 6 a.m., clutching my property deed, I realized that my peaceful life in desert trails was officially over. The battle for my driveway had only just begun, and I had no idea how ugly it was about to get. They absolutely cannot force you to hand over keys to your private gate, said Attorney James Wilson, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed my documents. His office smelled like old books and strong coffee. Your property deed predates the HOA's formation by 2 full years. The grandfather clause in the original community document specifically protects all pre-existing property features. Relief washed over me. So, I can just say no? James leaned back in his chair. It's not quite that simple. While they can't legally force you to give them gate access, HOAs have plenty of ways to make homeowners miserable. They're already driving across my lawn. What else could they possibly do? Selective rule enforcement, constant inspections, petty fines for tiny violations, and most people just cave to the social pressure. He counted each one off on his fingers. I've seen HOAs bully people until they sell and move. My stomach tightened. I'm not moving. This is my home. Then we fight smart, James said, grabbing a yellow legal pad. First, send them a formal cease and desist letter regarding the trespassing. Second, install visible security cameras to document everything. Third, show up at the next HOA meeting with copies of your deed. And finally, prepare for backlash. I paid James his consultation fee and left with my plan taking shape. That afternoon, I went to the hardware store and picked up 4 high-def security cameras. I spent hours mounting them to cover every angle of my yard. Just as I was installing the last one, I saw Karen walking down the sidewalk with her little yappy dog. She stopped when she saw me on the ladder. "Security cameras," she called, her voice soaked in fake concern. "I don't remember seeing an approval form for those. All exterior modifications require board approval, you know." "These aren't modifications, they're temporary security devices to document people trespassing on my property." Her face flushed red. "The board meeting is Thursday evening. I expect to receive your gate keys then." "Actually, I'll be there, but not with keys. I'll be bringing my property deed, the one that specifically exempts my driveway from any HOA easement." Karen's dog barked furiously as she tightened her leash on the lead. "We'll see about that," she snapped, then turned and stormed off. The next morning, I walked outside and found my mailbox had been knocked clean over, the post snapped at the base.
Later that afternoon, James's cease and desist letter was delivered by certified mail to every HOA board member. Their response came fast. I was washing dishes that evening when I heard a loud crash from outside. By the time I got to the door, all I saw were tail lights disappearing around the corner. My row of solar garden lights had been smashed to pieces. I immediately checked my security footage. There they were, Jason Whitaker and his teenage son, Tyler, stepping out of their SUV, stomping on my lights, and knocking over my bird bath before driving off. The next morning, I went straight to the police station and filed a vandalism report. "We see this kind of thing with HOAs all the time," said Officer Martinez as she took my statement. "Unfortunately, the damage is under $500, so it's a misdemeanor. We'll talk to them, but don't expect much." When I got home, a bright orange violation notice was taped to my front door. Unapproved security cameras, $75 fine. Unkempt lawn debris, $50 fine. Total due $125, due within 14 days. The so-called lawn debris was the shattered solar lights and destroyed mailbox, the damage that Jason and Tyler caused. That night, I printed out flyers with screenshots from my security footage. Jason and Tyler caught red-handed. No captions, no commentary, just still images with the date and timestamp. At 10 p.m., when the neighborhood was quiet, I placed a flyer in every mailbox on the block. By morning, my phone was exploding with messages. Some neighbors were supportive. Others accused me of stirring up drama and escalating things. By noon, Karen had sent a community-wide email accusing me of spreading doctored images and slandering respected residents. I was in the kitchen making lunch when I heard engines outside. Looking through the blinds, I saw 3 vehicles lined up at the edge of my lawn. Karen's white sedan, Jason's massive SUV, and Linda Greer's red crossover. One by one, they deliberately drove across my front lawn, deep tire tracks slicing through the grass. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone to record, but they were already speeding off, honking and laughing like kids. Just then, my neighbor, Emma Jenkins, from across the street, called. "I saw what they just did," she said, her voice full of anger. "This isn't right. A bunch of us are talking about showing up to that HOA meeting to support you. That small act of kindness nearly brought me to tears. Thank you, Emma." "Don't thank me yet," she warned. "Karen's been president a long time, and she doesn't lose without a fight."
Karen had only been HOA president for a few weeks, but she'd already managed to alienate half the neighborhood with her power trips. The problem was, most people were just too afraid to stand up to her. After Emma and I hung up, I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring out at the muddy tire tracks crisscrossing what used to be a beautifully manicured lawn. This was no longer about a gate. The HOA board was waging open war against me. All because I dared to say no. If they wanted access to my driveway so badly, I'd give them exactly what they deserved, but on my terms. I opened my laptop and started researching driveway security measures. As images of retractable steel spikes and heavy-duty bollards filled the screen, a slow smile crept across my face. They had no idea who they were messing with. $500 for retractable security spikes, I muttered, eyeing one particular model. Pricey. But after 3 more cars rolled across my lawn that morning, it started to feel like a bargain. Delivery would take 2 weeks, though. Too long to wait. A knock at the door pulled me out of my thoughts. Standing on my porch was Mr. Franklin, the 78-year-old retired aerospace engineer who lived at the far end of our street. "Been watching this circus for days now," he said, without so much as a hello. "Saw those idiots driving across your yard this morning. Disgraceful." "Come in," I offered, grateful for an ally. Mr. Franklin eased into one of my kitchen chairs and set his thermos on the table. "Back in my day, we handled problems like this ourselves. I've got some ideas that won't cost you $500. Over coffee, he sketched out plans for a simple but genius homemade spike system. "Hydraulics are easy," he said. "I've got most of the parts in my garage already. We could have it done by this weekend if you're interested." "That would be amazing," I said, poring over his surprisingly professional blueprints. "One more thing," he added, tapping his finger on the table. "My grandson works for Channel 8 News, investigative reporter, loves stories about corrupt HOAs." My brain started putting together a whole new plan. How soon could he stop by? "Tomorrow morning," Mr. Franklin said, grinning like a kid about to pull a prank. That evening, I received another official HOA notice, this time listing 6 new violations, including excessive driveway dust and unauthorized bird feeder color. The total? $450 in new fines. I immediately called Emma. "How many neighbors are actually thinking of supporting me?" "At least 12. Karen's made plenty of enemies. The Rodriguez family got fined last week because their Christmas lights were still up on January 3rd, one day past Karen's arbitrary deadline." "Can you get everyone together tonight? My place, 8 o'clock. By 8 p.m., 14 neighbors had crowded into my living room. I passed around copies of my property deed, the cease and desist letter, and printed photos of the vandalism. "They've targeted all of us at some point," said Mrs. Rodriguez. "Last month, Jason parked his boat in front of our house for a week while they hosted out-of-town guests. No warning, no notice. Kevin Jang threatened to report my son's basketball hoop as a safety hazard unless I voted in favor of that new landscaping contract. The contractor? Thomas Whitaker's brother." One by one, the stories poured out, frustration turning into determination. We formed a plan. Document every instance of HOA overreach. Attend the upcoming Thursday meeting together. Speak up loud and clear. "And one more thing," I said, telling them about the news crew coming the next morning. Sure enough, the next day, a Channel 8 news van rolled up and parked outside my home, just as Karen was walking her dog past my property. Her face went white when she saw the camera crew setting up in my front yard. "We're filming a special report on HOA disputes," the reporter said when Karen marched over demanding answers. "Specifically," he continued, "about HOA board members vandalizing private property and pressuring residents to hand over keys without legal grounds. That's defamation. You can't film here without permission." "Actually," the reporter said with a cool smile, "we have permission from the homeowner, and nothing we're saying is defamatory if it's true, and documented." Karen stormed off, furiously dialing her phone. The segment aired that night. HOA overreach, when neighborhood power goes too far. They showed my security footage of Thomas and Tyler destroying my property. They interviewed Emma, Mr. Franklin, and others about their own experiences. They highlighted my deed, my rights, and the board's attempts to override them. Minutes after the broadcast ended, my phone rang.
It was Thomas Whitaker. "You've made a huge mistake," he growled, barely able to contain his rage. "This isn't just about a stupid gate anymore. We're calling an emergency board meeting tonight. You're going to regret this little publicity stunt." That night, while Mr. Franklin and I were outside finishing installation of the homemade spike system, I noticed a car parked a few houses down, engine running, lights off. I squinted into the darkness. The silhouette looked an awful lot like Tyler Reynolds. As we tightened the last bolts and connected the hydraulics beneath the entrance to my driveway, Mr. Franklin gave my shoulder a firm pat. "Ready for the test?" I nodded and pressed the remote control. With a satisfying metallic whir, steel spikes rose silently from the hidden compartments in the concrete, gleaming in the moonlight like the fangs of some dormant beast. "Beautiful," Mr. Franklin whispered, admiring the rising steel spikes. "They won't know what hit them." I went to bed that night feeling ready, but uneasy. That same car stayed parked down the street until dawn. In the morning, I woke up to find my front door splattered with eggs and ketchup. One of my security cameras had been spray-painted black, but not before capturing a crystal-clear image of Tyler Reynolds' face. At work later that day, my boss called me into her office. "Is there something you'd like to tell me?" she asked, sliding a printed email across the desk. It was from Thomas Whitaker. In it, he claimed I had threatened his family and was mentally unstable, and he'd sent it to the entire company. "This is retaliation," I said, my voice shaking as I showed her the Channel 8 news segment on my phone. "I've never threatened anyone. He's trying to ruin my reputation because I exposed what he and others have done." My boss nodded slowly. "Be careful with these people," she warned. "I've dealt with power-hungry HOA boards before. They fight dirty." By the time I got home, the situation had gone from bad to surreal. My front yard was swarming with neighbors and flashing police lights. Emma ran up to my car the moment I pulled into the driveway. "They tried to take down your gate," she shouted. "Thomas and Kevin showed up with power tools while you were at work, said the HOA gave them authority to remove unapproved structures. Mr. Franklin caught the whole thing on video and called the cops." Officer Martinez was already there, speaking with several neighbors. When she spotted me, she waved me over. "Your neighbors witnessed attempted destruction of private property, and considering your previous reports and how many witnesses we now have, we're taking this very seriously." As she spoke, I noticed Karen's white sedan creeping past my house. Our eyes met briefly. This time, there was no smug smile, only fear. The HOA meeting was scheduled for the next evening. Whatever happened there would determine whether this war ended or escalated. Either way, I was ready. The community center was packed for the HOA meeting. I'd never seen so many residents show up before. Karen sat stiffly at the board table, clearly uncomfortable. Officer Martinez was in the back row, observing silently. "First item on the agenda," Karen began, avoiding eye contact. "We need to address the matter regarding property access rights for the corner lot on Maple and Cactus View." "You mean the illegal demand for my gate keys and the vandalism against my private property?" Kevin Zhang jumped in. "The board voted unanimously to exercise our easement rights under Section 14.3 of the bylaws." I stood up, holding copies of my deed high in the air. "Except there is no easement on my property. It was purchased before the HOA even existed. My lawyer confirmed it. So did the county records office." "We should table this," Thomas muttered. "Move on to other business." "No," Emma called from the back. "We're all here because we want answers. 14 homeowners signed a petition demanding an explanation for selective rule enforcement and illegal board actions." She handed the petition to Margaret, who looked increasingly uncomfortable as murmurs filled the room. "We will follow proper procedure," Karen snapped, banging the gavel. The board has been caught on camera vandalizing private property and attempting to destroy a locked gate." Mr. Patel interrupted. The room erupted into overlapping voices. Officer Martinez stood. Her presence immediately silenced the crowd. "I am not here in an official capacity, but given recent events, I thought it wise to observe tonight's meeting." Karen's face flushed deep red. "This is a closed community matter," she stammered. "Actually," said a man I didn't recognize, rising from the third row, "HOA meetings are required by state law to be open to all homeowners." He adjusted his tie. "I'm Jason Lee, legal counsel for several residents present tonight." Thomas leaned over to whisper something to Karen, who shook her head quickly. "I move that we dismiss the current demands regarding the corner property gate," Margaret said suddenly, shocking everyone. "New information suggests we may have overstepped." Kevin looked confused. Thomas stared daggers at Margaret, who avoided his gaze. "Second," Mrs. Rodriguez firmly said. "We can't just—" Thomas began. "All in favor?" Karen cut him off. Hands shot up all over the room, including Margaret's. After a long pause, Kevin raised his too. Thomas sat back, arms crossed and scowling. "Motion passes," Karen said quietly. "The request for gate access is withdrawn." A small victory, but I wasn't finished. "What about the vandalism, the harassment, the false violation notices? Thomas and Tyler destroyed my property. Kevin tried to tear down my gate." Thomas stood up abruptly. "You can't prove anything. That footage could have been anyone." "Actually," said a new voice from the doorway, "we have multiple witnesses and clear footage." The Channel 8 reporter stepped forward, cameraman behind him. "We're doing a follow-up story on HOA abuse of power. Mind if we film this public meeting?" Karen looked like she might faint. "This meeting is adjourned," she barked, snatching up her papers. "One moment," Jason Lee said smoothly. "According to your bylaws, Article 7, Section 3, a motion takes precedence over adjournment if seconded. I move for an emergency recall of the entire HOA board based on documented violations of HOA bylaws, state law, and ethical standards." "Second!" shouted at least 10 voices in unison. What followed was the 2 hours of the most intense, emotional public discussion I'd ever seen in our usually sleepy suburban community. One by one, neighbors stepped forward, and they told their stories.
Selective rule enforcement. Suspicious financial decisions. The landscaping contract increased by 40% when it was handed to Thomas's brother's company, Mr. Franklin pointed out, distributing printed copies of the financial records he had requested months ago. And the reserve fund? It's down nearly $30,000, with no explanation of where the money went. By the end of the meeting, 2 major decisions had been made. An emergency board election would be held the following week, and a full financial audit had been approved. As people filed out, Margaret approached me quietly. "Check the Rosewood Lane development proposal," she whispered. "County Records Office. That's what this is really about." The next morning, I headed straight to the County Records Building. After an hour of digging, I found it. Blueprints for a massive housing development planned for the empty land behind Rosewood Lane. There was only one viable construction access point: through my property. The developer's name? Reynolds Construction, LLC, owned by none other than Thomas Reynolds. I drove home, the pieces clicking into place. This had never been about neighborhood shortcuts. They needed access for heavy machinery and equipment.
The narrow existing roads weren't wide enough. When I pulled into my driveway, I spotted Karen's white sedan approaching. Slowly. Then she'd gunned it, straight toward my driveway entrance. "No!" I yelled, scrambling for the remote control in my pocket. But I was too late. Her car crossed onto my private property, accelerating toward the garage just as I hit the button. Crack! The loud pop of two front tires bursting echoed down the street. Her car jolted and skidded to a stop, front end lurching from the hidden spike strip. Exactly as planned. Karen stumbled out of the vehicle, face twisted in rage. "You pythopath! Look what you did to my car!" "You're trespassing on clearly marked private property," I said calmly, pointing to the newly posted "No Trespassing" and "Private Driveway" signs, as documented by my security system. As if on cue, the Channel 8 news van rounded the corner. "You set me up!" Karen shrieked, suddenly spotting the camera. "This is a trap!" "I protected my property from repeat trespassers," I corrected, holding up my phone, which displayed footage of her car crossing my lawn the previous week. "The spikes are fully legal, installed on private ground. You had no permission to be here." The Channel 8 news reporter stepped forward with microphone in hand. "Mrs. Morgan, would you care to explain why you're driving on private property after the HOA formally dropped its access request? And perhaps comment on the recently discovered development plans involving Reynolds Construction." Karen's face went from red to ghost white. She looked at the reporter, then at me, then down at her car. 4 tires completely shredded. "No comment," she muttered, fumbling for her phone. "I need to call my husband." I smiled, knowing Thomas would soon have far bigger problems. The audit was underway. The development plans were no longer secret. The game had changed. Neighbors began stepping out of their homes, drawn by the commotion. Emma gave me a big thumbs up from across the street. Mr. Franklin chuckled at the sight of Karen's disabled vehicle. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I'd won. Not just protected my own home, but exposed the corruption that had infected all of Desert Trails. The emergency HOA meeting that followed was so crowded they had to bring in chairs from adjacent rooms. Even then, people stood shoulder to shoulder along the walls. I arrived early, setting up my laptop and projector with Jason Lee and Mr. Franklin beside me. Thomas and Karen hadn't shown their faces in the neighborhood since the spike strip incident. Rumor had it they were consulting with lawyers. "They'll be here," Emma whispered beside me. "Thomas has too much riding on that development project." Right on cue, Thomas and Karen walked in, flanked by a stern man in a tailored navy suit. Thomas looked haggard, with deep shadows under his eyes. Karen's usual polished appearance couldn't hide her anxiety. Mrs. Rodriguez, acting as interim chair, called the meeting to order. First item, results of the financial audit. Jason Lee stepped up to the podium. The preliminary audit has revealed several disturbing discrepancies. Over the past 12 months, roughly $74,000 in HOA funds were dispersed to vendors with no documentation or board approval. Gasps spread through the room. The largest payment, $42,000, went to Evergreen Landscaping Services. Our investigation shows no records of work performed. He projected the business registration paperwork. Evergreen Landscaping is owned by Richard Reynolds, Thomas Reynolds' brother. Thomas leapt to his feet. "This is a witch hunt. Those payments were authorized." "By whom?" "Because the full board never voted. Only you, Karen, and Kevin signed the disbursements." He held up a notarized statement. Kevin has since submitted a sworn affidavit stating that he was misled, told the payments were for emergency repairs. Across the room, Kevin sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the floor. Jason switched slides again. Now, regarding the Rosewood Lane development. The man in the expensive suit stood up. My client is under no obligation to disclose private business dealings in this setting. Your client used his HOA position to gain unauthorized access to private land for commercial gain. That is absolutely relevant. I stepped forward with a flash drive in hand. May I asked. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded. I plugged in the drive and opened the files, and the goosebumps were everywhere.
At the county records office, I uncovered the full scope. Blueprints showing a 38-unit townhouse development planned directly behind Rosewood Lane. The only practical construction access? Through my property. Thomas had known this when he purchased the land 6 months earlier. On screen, I displayed a series of emails, direct correspondence between Thomas and the city's planning commission, explicitly discussing the access issue. "How did you get those?" Thomas demanded, his face reddening. "Public records request," I replied evenly. "Everything submitted to the planning commission is public information." Thomas's attorney leaned in to whisper urgently in his ear, but Thomas waved him off. "Yeah, I'm developing that land. So what? It's going to raise everyone's property values. You people should be thanking me." "By destroying my property?" I asked. "By trying to bully me into surrendering my legal rights?" "We offered to pay you for the easement," Thomas shouted. The room went completely silent. "He just admitted everything," someone whispered. "No, you didn't," I said quietly. "You demanded access under false HOA authority. You never once mentioned development, construction equipment, or compensation." Thomas looked around, panic spreading across his face. "That's not what I meant." Karen tugged on his sleeve, trying to get him to sit down. "The Planning Commission has been notified about the attempted coercion," Jason said, stepping up again. "They're now reviewing whether the development permits were obtained through legal channels." The meeting continued for another 2 hours. By the end, the community had voted overwhelmingly to remove the entire HOA board and install temporary officers until formal elections could be held. A full forensic audit was approved and a new committee formed to rewrite the HOA bylaws to prevent future abuse. As people filtered out, Margaret approached me. "I knew something felt off about all this. I'm sorry I went along with it." "Why did you?" I asked. She looked down. "Thomas told us your property was hurting everyone's home values, that your refusal to cooperate was selfish." She sighed. "I never even checked if that was true." Almost everyone had left when Thomas confronted me in the parking lot. "You've ruined everything," he hissed. "My development, my reputation. This isn't over." "Actually," came a voice from behind us, "it is." Officer Martinez stepped forward with another officer at his side. "Thomas Reynolds, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and criminal mischief." Thomas barely had time to blink before they cuffed him and led him to the squad car. Karen stood frozen by their rental car. Her original still sat at the local tire shop, all 4 tires destroyed. For a split second, I almost felt bad for her. Then I remembered the tire tracks on my lawn, the threats, the vandalism. "I didn't know," she said softly, not meeting my eyes. "He convinced me we were doing the right thing, that the development would fix everything, our finances, our future." Without another word, she got in the car and drove off. I didn't know if I'd ever see her again. As I walked home beneath the stars, I finally let myself exhale. The fight wasn't completely over, but for the first time in weeks, I knew I'd won the war. 6 months passed quickly.
Spring came to Pine Haven Gardens, bringing fresh blooms, including in my newly restored front yard. The spike strip had been removed, but my neighbors still joked about it whenever someone new moved in. "Remember when Karen's tires went pop?" Mr. Franklin would say, grinning and mimicking the sound. At 78, he'd become something of a local legend after helping me install the now famous trap. The new HOA board worked with full transparency. Every meeting was recorded and posted online. All financial transactions required dual approvals and were reviewed monthly by a resident oversight group. Thomas ended up pleading guilty to reduce charges of financial mismanagement. He paid restitution to avoid jail time. The development deal? Sold to a new company, one that was working legally with the city to explore other access routes. Karen filed for divorce and left town. Kevin issued a heartfelt apology to the neighborhood and stepped back from all HOA involvement. To everyone's surprise, Margaret stepped up to help rewrite the bylaws, using her background in admin work to identify and close potential loopholes. One morning, as I sat on my porch with coffee in hand, Emma walked up the path. "You're on the front page again," she said, handing me the local paper. The headline read, "State Legislature Proposes Corner Lot Protection Act After HOA Scandal." The article detailed how our little neighborhood battle had sparked a statewide debate about HOA overreach and homeowners' rights. The proposed legislation, dubbed the Spike Law, would protect homeowners from forced easements and clearly define the limits of HOA power. As Emma left, a moving truck pulled up in front of Thomas and Karen's old house that had sat empty for months. "New neighbors," Emma noted. "Let's hope they're better than the last ones." Later that afternoon, as I trimmed my hedges, keeping them exactly at HOA-approved height, a couple approached the house next door, smiling, waving.
As I adjusted the last hinge on the gate, I noticed a couple walking over from the house that once belonged to Thomas and Diane Reynolds. "Hi there," the woman said with a cheerful smile. "We just moved in. I'm Sarah Chun, and this is my husband, Michael." We shook hands, and I welcomed them to the neighborhood. "We heard this place has quite a history," Michael added, glancing toward the street. "Something about the previous owners and a gate dispute?" I smiled. "It's a long story, but it taught all of us some important lessons about respecting boundaries and standing up for what's right." "Well, we're excited to be part of the community. The HOA president, Emma, I think, already stopped by with the welcome packet and went over all the rules. She seemed really nice." "Emma's the best," I agreed. "Things work differently around here now. The HOA exists to support the neighborhood, not control it." As they continued their walk, I noticed a familiar car slowly making its way down the street. It was Diane. She looked older somehow, her posture more rigid, her expression guarded. Our eyes met for a brief moment. Then she looked away and drove on. That evening, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. "I'm sorry for what we did to you," Diane had written. "Thomas convinced me it was for the greater good of the neighborhood, but I should have questioned him. The development scheme was failing, and he saw your property as the fix for everything. That doesn't excuse what we did, but I wanted you to know I regret my part in it. Sometimes standing up to bullies means standing up to the ones closest to you." I folded the letter carefully and tucked it away. I hadn't expected closure,
But there it was. Emma had asked me more than once to join the new HOA board, and I'd always declined. But now, as I looked out over the peaceful street, I thought maybe it was time to help shape the future, not just defend the present. The next morning, I installed a new gate. No spikes this time, just a modern keypad for emergency services. No need for traps anymore. Just clear boundaries and mutual respect. As I finished tightening the last bolt, a few neighbors passed by, waving and smiling. Mr. Franklin hobbled up with his cane, admiring the work. "Nice gate," he said, nodding, "but I still say the spikes had more style." We both laughed, remembering how one small stand against unreasonable demands had transformed an entire community. Looking out over my quiet street, restored yard, and friendly neighbors, I realized something. Sometimes defending your own boundaries is how everyone else finds theirs.